Most people think the battle for peace is happening somewhere outside them, in their job, in their bank account, in their relationships, in the opinions of strangers, in the chaos of the world. But the Stoics would tell you that the real battle has always been happening in one place and one place only, inside your own mind. And if you do not learn to rule that inner kingdom, then no success will ever satisfy you, no praise will ever calm you, no comfort will ever make you feel secure. Because a mind that has not been trained will turn every blessing into anxiety and every challenge into suffering. So if you want to know how to control your mind, Stoicism does not begin with some fantasy of becoming emotionless, cold, or detached from life. It begins with a brutal and liberating truth. Your mind is disturbed not only by what happens, but by the meaning you attach to what happens. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because you stop seeing yourself as a helpless victim of events and begin seeing yourself as the author of your responses. And that is where power begins. Not in controlling the weather, not in controlling the economy, not in controlling people, but in controlling judgment, attention, desire, and action. The four invisible levers that shape your whole life, and in a world designed to fragment your attention, provoke your emotions, and keep you reactive. Stoicism is not ancient decoration, it is mental armor. It is a method for reclaiming authority over yourself, because the person who masters their mind cannot be manipulated by praise, broken by criticism, enslaved by impulse, or destroyed by temporary pain. And if that sounds extreme, consider the opposite. Look at how most people live. They wake up and instantly surrender their consciousness to the outside world. They check their phone before they check their thoughts. They let headlines set their mood. They let messages decide their worth. They let delays, disappointments, and other people's behavior dictate their emotional climate. They call this normal, but the Stoics would call it bondage, because if your peace depends on things you do not control, then your peace is never truly yours. And this is the first lesson you must understand if you want to control your mind. You must separate what is within your power from what is not. Epictetus taught that some things are up to us and some things are not. And in that single idea lies the foundation of mental freedom. Your opinions are up to you. Your choices are up to you. Your values are up to you. Your effort is up to you. Your character is up to you. But whether people like you, whether plans unfold perfectly, whether your body stays healthy forever, whether life remains comfortable, these things are not fully yours to command, and the misery of most human beings comes from confusing these two categories. They try to control outcomes instead of conduct, reputation instead of integrity, the future instead of the present choice. And then they wonder why their mind feels like a storm. But your mind begins to stabilize the moment you stop demanding control over what was never yours in the first place. Think about how much of your suffering comes from arguing with reality. You wanted someone to understand you, but they did not. You wanted success to come faster, but it did not. You wanted your past to be different, but it is not. You wanted life to be fair, consistent, and predictable. But life made no such promise. And every time your mind says this should not be happening, you add a second wound to the first, because pain is one thing, but resistance to pain multiplies it. Loss is one thing, but outrage at loss deepens it. Uncertainty is one thing, but obsession with uncertainty poisons the day. The Stoics do not ask you to like hardship. They ask you to stop making it heavier through complaint, fantasy, and emotional dramatization, because the event itself is often smaller than the story you build around it. A rude comment lasts a second, but your replaying of it lasts for hours. A mistake happens once, but your identity fuses with it for years. A fear appears as a thought, but you treat it like prophecy. And this is why Stoicism teaches that your first task is to watch the mind before you obey it. Not every thought deserves trust. Not every feeling deserves a throne. Not every impulse deserves action. Your mind generates noise, and wisdom begins when you stop bowing to every inner voice as if it were truth. One of the most destructive illusions in modern life is the belief that freedom means doing whatever you feel like doing. But the Stoics understood that a person ruled by impulse is not free at all. They are a servant with invisible chains. If anger can drag you around, you're not free. If envy can hijack your mood, you're not free. If comfort can seduce you away from what matters, you are not free. If fear can silence your principles, you are not free. Real freedom is self-command. It is the ability to feel the pull of emotion without being pulled apart by it, to notice desire without worshiping it, to meet pain without collapsing into it. And that does not happen by accident. It happens through training. Because the mind is like a wild horse. If you never discipline it, it will carry you wherever its panic and appetite choose. But if you train it patiently, firmly, and consistently, it becomes strength in motion. And this is why Stoicism is not just philosophy to think about. It is philosophy to practice. Not someday, not when life calms down, but in the middle of the noise. Because the mind is shaped by repetition. Whatever you repeatedly allow becomes a habit. Whatever you repeatedly practice becomes your nature. If you repeatedly indulge resentment, you become resentful. If you repeatedly rehearse fear, you become fearful. If you repeatedly choose courage, restraint, patience, and clarity, you become strong. Character is not built in one dramatic moment. It is carved through small daily decisions, through the silent choices no one applauds, the pause before reacting, the breath before replying, the refusal to indulge self-pity, the decision to keep your word when excuses would be easy, and when people ask how to control the mind, what they are often really asking is, how do I stop being controlled by myself? How do I stop betraying my better judgment? How do I stop letting temporary emotions produce permanent damage? And the Stoic answer is simple, though not easy. You train the space between impression and response. Every day, life throws impressions at you. Someone ignores you. A plan fails. A bill arrives. A memory stings. A fear rises. A temptation appears. And the untrained mind reacts instantly. It labels, exaggerates, personalizes, and obeys. But the Stoic inserts a moment of examination. They do not say this is terrible. They ask, is it terrible? They do not say this ruins everything. They ask, does it really? They do not say, I cannot bear this. They ask, must I say that before I've even tried? This pause is small, but it is everything, because within that pause lies the possibility of freedom. And if you want to control your mind, you must learn to lengthen that pause, because most bad decisions do not come from evil intentions. They come from unexamined reactions. A moment of anger destroys a relationship. A moment of insecurity invites self-sabotage. A moment of craving breaks discipline. A moment of fear shrinks a life. And the person who never pauses becomes a prisoner of moments. But the person who pauses begins to become sovereign. They no longer confuse emotion with command. They no longer confuse discomfort with danger. They no longer confuse thought with destiny. And that changes the quality of their entire existence. Consider anger, one of the most powerful forces the Stoics warned against. Anger feels strong, righteous, energizing. It gives the illusion of power, but in reality, it is surrender, because the angry person has handed their nervous system to someone else. They are no longer choosing their inner state. They are being driven by injury and ego. Seneca wrote extensively about anger because he knew how quickly it can turn a reasonable person into something reckless and humiliating. And if you observe your own life, you will see the same pattern. Anger rarely improves judgment. It narrows it. It makes you say what cannot be unsaid, send what cannot be unsent, damage what took years to build, and afterward you call it a mistake. But the Stoic would call it a failure of inner governance, not because you felt anger, feelings arrive uninvited, but because you crowned anger king and obeyed it. Stoicism does not teach you to never feel the surge. It teaches you to intercept it before it becomes your master, to recognize that the first movement of emotion may not be your choice, but what you do with it is. And this is a life-changing distinction, because it means you do not need to hate yourself for your first reaction. You only need to take responsibility for your next one. And that principle applies not only to anger, but to anxiety, jealousy, pride, sadness, and fear. You are not fully responsible for every emotion that passes through you, but you are responsible for the beliefs you feed, the stories you repeat, and the behaviors you choose in response. Anxiety in particular reveals why Stoicism remains so relevant, because anxiety is often the attempt to mentally control what cannot be controlled physically. It is the mind trying to solve uncertainty by rehearsing pain in advance, as if repeated worrying could soften the blow of reality. But what usually happens is the opposite. You suffer now for a future that may never arrive, and even if it does arrive, you suffer twice. Once in imagination and once in experience. The Stoics saw clearly that much of human misery is manufactured in advance, not by facts, but by interpretation, by anticipation, by catastrophic storytelling, and the remedy is not blind optimism, it is disciplined realism. Ask yourself, what is actually happening right now? Not next week. Not in the worst-case movie playing in your head. But right now. What is here? What is required? What is within my power in this moment? Because the mind becomes manageable when you reduce life to the present duty, not the entire imagined mountain. And this is how Stoicism cuts through mental chaos. It keeps pulling you back from abstraction to action, from fantasy to fact, from fear to function. What can I do now? What can I bear now? What can I choose now? And the more often you return to these questions, the less power your mind has to frighten you with shadows. But controlling the mind is not only about handling pain, it is also about handling pleasure. Because many people are not ruined by suffering. They are ruined by comfort, distraction, and appetite. They become mentally weak not because life is too hard, but because indulgence becomes their default setting. The Stoics understood that if your happiness depends on constant stimulation, convenience, praise, and consumption, then your mind will become fragile, impatient, and hard to satisfy. And that fragility will show itself the moment life denies you what you want. This is why Stoicism values voluntary discomfort, not as punishment, but as preparation. Take the cold shower sometimes, skip the unnecessary luxury sometimes, sit with silence sometimes, do difficult things on purpose sometimes. Not to prove toughness to the world, but to prove to yourself that your peace is not dependent on softness, because every time you willingly practice hardship, you weaken fear's hold over you. You teach your nervous system that discomfort is survivable, that inconvenience is not catastrophe, that craving is not command, and this builds a mind that is harder to manipulate. Marketers, algorithms, and social pressure thrive on an undisciplined mind. A mind that must be entertained, must be validated, must be soothed, must be fed, must be pleased immediately. But the Stoic mind asks a different question. Not what do I feel like doing, but what is worth doing. Not what is easiest, but what is right. Not what will numb me, but what will strengthen me. And when that becomes your pattern, you stop being easy to control from the outside, because the world can only exploit what you refuse to master within yourself. Another reason the mind feels out of control is that many people have never decided what they stand for. They have preferences, moods, impulses, and dreams. But they do not have principles. And without principles, the mind becomes unstable, because every situation feels like a crisis of identity. Every criticism feels like annihilation. Every temptation feels confusing. Every setback feels personal. But when you know your values, your mind gains structure. The Stoics organized life around virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, and whether you use those exact words or not, the principle remains. When your life is governed by values deeper than mood, your mind becomes harder to shake. Because now you have a compass, and a compass does not eliminate storms. It helps you navigate them. If wisdom matters more to you than looking impressive, then being corrected will hurt less. If justice matters more to you than ego, then conflict becomes less about winning and more about what is fair. If courage matters more to you than comfort, then fear stops deciding your future. If temperance matters more to you than appetite, then desire stops setting the rules. And once the mind serves principles instead of impulses, it becomes a far more trustworthy instrument, because it is no longer reinventing itself every hour based on environment, attention, or emotion. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor with more pressure than most of us can imagine, repeatedly wrote reminders to himself, not because he lacked intelligence, but because even a powerful man needed daily correction of thought, and that alone should humble you, if a ruler of an empire needed inner discipline. Why would you imagine that your mind will simply behave without training? Marcus reminded himself that people can be rude, selfish, dishonest, and ignorant, not so that he could become bitter, but so that he would not be shocked when reality behaved like reality. And this is another Stoic secret to mental control. Lower your sense of surprise. Much suffering comes from unrealistic expectations. You expect people to act with maturity they have never demonstrated. You expect life to unfold according to timelines it never promised. You expect permanent clarity in an impermanent world, and then when reality contradicts the fantasy, you call it a crisis. But often, it is simply life being life. And the more honestly you accept human nature, uncertainty, change, aging, loss, and limitation, the less emotionally violent they become when they arrive. This does not make you pessimistic. It makes you prepared, and preparation is one of the deepest forms of calm. Stoicism also teaches you to be careful with identity statements, because the mind listens to the language you repeat. When you constantly say, "I am anxious, I am broken, I am a mess, I am behind, I am unlucky, I am not disciplined," you are doing more than describing a temporary state. You are carving a prison around it. The Stoics would advise a more precise way of seeing. Anxiety is present, but it is not my essence. Fear is visiting, but it is not my ruler. Confusion exists, but clarity can still be chosen. The difference may seem subtle, but it matters, because the mind tends to move in the direction of the labels you make sacred, and if you turn every struggle into identity, then improvement feels like betrayal of who you are. But if you treat your current state as material for discipline rather than a permanent definition, you preserve freedom. You stop worshiping the story of your weakness and begin working on the reality of your strength. This is why Stoicism is not about saying pleasant things to yourself. It is about saying accurate things, useful things, sovereign things. Not "I feel fear, therefore I cannot act," but "I feel fear and can still act with dignity." Not "this discomfort is unbearable," but "this discomfort is unpleasant and temporary." Not "everything is ruined, but something difficult has happened and I will meet it well." That is how the mind is retrained, sentence by sentence, judgment by judgment, day by day. There is also a darker truth the Stoics ask you to face, and it is one most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You are mortal. Everyone you love is mortal. Everything you own is temporary, and the world will not pause to negotiate with your attachment. Now, at first this sounds depressing, but to the Stoics it was clarifying, because when you remember death, your mind stops wasting so much life on triviality, on wounded pride, on petty comparison, on endless postponement, on imaginary dramas that vanish under the light of finitude. When you realize your time is not guaranteed, the question changes from "how do I protect myself from every discomfort" to "how do I use this day well?" And strangely, mortality makes the mind more peaceful, not less, because it strips away the illusion that you can one day arrange life so perfectly that risk disappears. No, risk is built into being alive, loss is built in, endings are built in. And once you stop treating this as an error in the system, you become far less fragile. You cherish without clinging, act without delaying, love without illusion of ownership. And when the mind stops demanding permanence from a temporary world, it suffers less from the very nature of existence. This is why gratitude matters so much in Stoicism, not as a sentimental ritual, but as a mental correction. Gratitude reminds you that what you have today was never guaranteed. Your breath, your body, your chance to begin again. The people still here. The lesson hidden in a hard season. The opportunity to choose a better response than yesterday. And when the mind practices gratitude, it becomes less greedy, less frantic, less blind to what is already present. Many people cannot control their minds because their minds are trained only to notice absence, what is missing, what is late, what is unfair, what someone else has, what could go wrong. But a mind trained in gratitude does not become passive, it becomes sane. It remembers abundance without denying difficulty, and that balance is powerful because bitterness narrows intelligence while gratitude expands perspective. And perspective is essential if you want control. You cannot steer clearly when your mind is fogged by entitlement, resentment, and comparison. Comparison, in fact, is one of the most effective ways to lose authority over your mind, because the moment you measure your worth through someone else's timeline, appearance, status, audience, or success, you hand them psychological influence over you without their permission or even their awareness, and then your inner climate changes every time their life appears to rise. But Stoicism calls you back to your lane. Your job is not to outshine everyone. Your job is to become excellent in character, focused in action, and peaceful in conscience. Another person's talents do not diminish yours. Another person's spotlight does not block your path. Another person's applause cannot define your value unless you are desperate to be defined by it. And the Stoic mind refuses that desperation. It does not say, "I am better than them." It says, "Their path is theirs, mine is mine. Let me return to what I can improve." This return is a kind of mental homecoming, because comparison scatters the self while principle gathers it. And the more often you return to your own work, your own standards, your own conduct, the less crowded your mind becomes. Now, none of this means the Stoic never feels pain, grief, fear, disappointment, or loneliness. That is a misunderstanding repeated by people who confuse discipline with numbness. The Stoic feels deeply, but they aim to feel cleanly, without unnecessary self-deception, without theatrical suffering, without surrendering their agency. When grief comes, they grieve. When loss happens, they acknowledge the wound. When fear rises, they do not pretend it is courage, but they also do not make an altar of their emotion. They remember that the mind can witness pain without becoming identical to it. And this is crucial because many people secretly intensify their suffering by performing it to themselves, repeating it, narrating it, making it central, making it proof that life is uniquely against them. But the Stoic asks, how can I carry this with dignity? How can I suffer without becoming smaller? How can I let pain refine me instead of define me? And those questions protect the mind from turning hardship into identity. If you want a practical Stoic method for controlling your mind, begin with this simple sequence. Notice, question, reframe, act. Notice what impression has entered your mind. Maybe it is fear, anger, envy, shame, or desire. Question it. Is this fully true? Is this useful? Is this within my control? Reframe it according to reason. Perhaps this is difficult, but not disastrous. Perhaps this discomfort is training. Perhaps this criticism contains something useful. Perhaps this delay is not destruction. Perhaps this urge does not need obedience. Then act in the direction of virtue. Make the phone call, keep the promise. Remain silent instead of lashing out. Do the workout. Apologize honestly. Return to the task. Breathe and continue. Because action stabilizes the mind far more than rumination does. And one of the biggest traps people fall into is believing they must feel perfect before they can act well. Stoicism rejects that entirely. You do not wait for the mind to become calm before you choose discipline. You choose discipline, and the mind gradually learns calm from your example. This is why journaling can be such a Stoic practice, not because writing itself is magical, but because putting thought into words slows the chaos down, enough for reason to examine it. When a thought stays in your head, it can feel vast, absolute, overwhelming. But when you write it, you can confront it. Is this fear precise or vague? Is this anger justified or inflated? Is this desire noble or compulsive? What am I actually in control of here? What would the better version of me do next? These questions create inner order, and order is what the mind desperately needs, because the mind left alone often spirals. It generalizes one problem into a doomed future, one rejection into worthlessness, one bad day into a bad life. But reason brings proportion back, and proportion is one of the purest forms of strength. Another Stoic discipline is negative visualization, which sounds strange until you understand its purpose. The idea is not to obsess over disaster, but to remember the fragility of what you take for granted. Imagine losing what you have. Not to become miserable, but to become awake. Imagine your comfort gone, your routines interrupted, your privileges stripped back, and suddenly the ordinary becomes luminous. The people you ignore become precious. The opportunities you postpone become urgent. The small annoyances you dramatize become embarrassingly small. Negative visualization immunizes the mind against entitlement and panic, because when change comes, and it will, you are not meeting the concept for the first time. You have already rehearsed acceptance, and that rehearsal gives you poise. But perhaps the hardest Stoic lesson of all is this. No one is coming to do your inner work for you. No relationship will save you from self-betrayal. No amount of money will organize a chaotic mind. No audience will heal your lack of self-respect. No productivity system will replace character. The task is yours, the discipline is yours, the responsibility is yours. And while that may sound heavy, it is actually dignifying, because it means your life is not waiting on perfect conditions. Your peace is not locked behind somebody else's behavior. Your strength is not on back order. You can begin now in this mood, in this season, with this imperfect mind. And that is what makes Stoicism so powerful. It does not ask you to become superhuman. It asks you to become accountable, attentive, and deliberate. To stop outsourcing your stability to circumstances. To stop treating your reactions as sacred. To stop worshiping comfort more than character. So, what does it look like, practically, to control your mind in the Stoic sense? It looks like waking up and deciding that your first conversation will not be with the world, but with your own principles. It looks like anticipating difficulty instead of being offended by it. It looks like catching yourself in a spiral and asking what is the fact and what is the story. It looks like refusing to let irritation colonize the whole day. It looks like doing what is right, even when you do not feel inspired, It looks like letting other people have their opinions without renting them space in your head. It looks like remembering that every insult requires your cooperation to become an injury to your character. It looks like treating setbacks as training instead of as verdicts. It looks like wanting less, noticing more, speaking more carefully, complaining less, acting sooner, and recovering faster. It looks like becoming the kind of person who can be trusted by themselves. Imagine the force of such a person who does not panic every time life changes shape, a person who can hear criticism without crumbling, who can face uncertainty without inventing catastrophe, who can feel anger without turning cruel, who can experience desire without becoming enslaved, who can lose without losing themselves, who can wait without resentment, work without applause, suffer without spectacle, and love without possession. That is not weakness, that is not passivity, that is rare power. And in a culture obsessed with influence over others, Stoicism reminds you that the highest form of power is influence over yourself. Because if you command your own mind, then fortune can shake you but not own you. Success can visit you but not intoxicate you. Failure can strike you but not define you. And other people can misunderstand you without rewriting your soul. At the end of the day, controlling your mind does not mean eliminating every dark thought, every difficult emotion, or every moment of inner conflict. It means you stop letting those things make your decisions for you. It means you become a witness before a reactor, a chooser before a complainer, a builder before a blamer, and yes, you will fail at this. Often, you will still react too quickly, still overthink, still chase comfort, still replay wounds, still forget what you know. But Stoicism was never about perfection. It was about return. Return to reason. Return to the present. Return to your values. Return to the question, what is mine to govern right now? And every time you return, you strengthen the part of yourself that can lead the rest. So when the world becomes loud, when your thoughts become tangled, when fear starts painting futures that do not exist, when anger starts writing speeches in your mouth, when desire starts whispering that one more indulgence will finally satisfy you, remember this: the mind can be trained. Your thoughts are not your master unless you kneel to them. Your emotions are not your enemy unless you worship or fear them. Your circumstances are not the final authority on who you become. Between what happens and what you choose, there is a space, and in that space lies your freedom, your dignity, your character, your power. Protect that space, expand that space, live from that space, because that is where Stoicism begins, and that is how you control your mind.